Hello and welcome to another Tuesday of using up our scraps and tips. Today I'm going to show you how to do some of the Mickey cards for happy birthday, but also how to make this folder for a cute gift card set that again uses up scraps and would just be quick and easy to do with things you have on your desk. So I sorted out all of the papers that I had from my last month blitz of scrapbooking, and so I took this color family that I thought was perfect for some Mickey happy birthday cards, and I just cut them down into various widths. And as you can see here, I try to keep like the same pattern, the same width, so that I can do things like this of stack them and cover a whole. This is a regular 8.5 by 11 piece of printer paper. And so by keeping them the same widths, it allows you to do that. So I'm going to show you my process, but I'm going to speed it along. I kind of dry fit a little at first just to kind of set the tone for the paper. And then this time, I'll admit, I struggled. I didn't get enough glue down. So, I should have just gotten my big mat out and put the paper on it and just gone to town, but instead I was trying to get by with my little all-purpose mat so that the glue wasn't on my desktop. And apparently I didn't clean that mat the last time I used it, because if you saw, my paper was sticking right to it. And I think by the time I got that unstuck, then my glue had dried too much. And this two-way glue is tacky, but it's not permanent. Once it kind of dries, it's removable. And I think that's where I was having some issues, as I was sticking the papers down, but the glue was already too dry. So I did have to go back in with a different glue as I was assembling cards and that, and just kind of tack down ends. But normally I don't have an issue. So while I am filling in the rest of this page, if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, I will ask you to do that. Give a big thumbs up if you could. Also, if you don't want to watch the process of making this paper or the process of making the cards, I do have some chapter marks below the video, and you can kind of jump to the assembly or the creation with the instructions of making that folder. And I just, because the paper is two-sided, and I wanted to use the straight paper kind of as my, I don't know if it's a grounding point, but it basically keeps the theme of the paper and the colors. So I wanted to make sure to have that straight paper instead of the red that was on the back of that. So I finished putting all that together off camera, and now I'm taking some black shimmer trim, and I'm just going to cut a length here. And I'm leaving it so that it's sticky, and then very carefully I'm laying it down on my cutting mat, or my cutter, I should call this, sorry. And I just pull up real thin. They're like 1/8 of an inch strips. And I like this size because it's almost like a pinstriping now added to this paper. So I will do that one more time. So I end up getting 3 widths of this pinstriping out of the glitter shimmer trim, and for me it just kind of finishes out the paper piecing. The other thing that I've been known to do is to take lace and add it over top, but because my pieces were kind of small to begin with, I didn't have any big chunks of patterns, everything is kind of 1 inch or smaller, I didn't have any lace that would work with that. It was going to compete widthwise with my paper, so I just went with this 1/8 of an inch of the shimmer trim. So I trimmed off the edges of that, and now I went to one of the Craft with Heart stamp sets, and it has this happy birthday and kind of a scrolly banner, and I got my MISTI out. And what I like to do, I use my MISTI because if I don't get a good stamping, especially with words, you can always re-ink it and do it again. And I'm going to show you here that I use my suction cup to hold the lid, and if I have more than one of our ink pads stacked there, then the magnetic holds the bottom part of the pad down. Otherwise, if it's just one pad, that suction cup will pull the whole pad up. So I just go along here and I use the grid lines on this MISTI, and I move it up 3/4 of an inch each time, and then I'll flip it around and kind of start all over again from the other side. And that's just for me a quick, easy way to get a bunch of sentiments. So off camera, I grabbed some of the candy apple red and the black scraps that I've had left lying over from my projects. And then I'm cutting down my 8.5 by 11 sheet to kind of do some card fronts. So I'm going to do 2 that are 4.25 by 5.5. I'm going to say that again. They're 4 by 5.25. I actually did a 1/4 inch smaller than the size of a front of a card base. And then I cut it down using the same angle on the stripe paper. And then I'm going to try different things. I thought originally that I was going to frame that pattern paper and have it be on the front of the card base, but I didn't. It wasn't quite wide enough. So I'm going to go ahead and just butt it up against each other. And it's funny, I don't need to do this with my scoring tool to mark where the ends are. I could have just cut the paper using the top corner as my marker, and I will do that later and show you what I mean. So I've marked each of the edges so that I will have an exact match. I cut that, then one is for the companion from the one that I'm doing now. And I won't make every card on camera. I'll kind of like make one of each variety that I have, I think. And these Mickeys are left over from, again, my project in October when I did some Disney scrapbooking all month. And they were from the Disney and Friends, or Mickey and Friends, excuse me, Cricut image set. And I had these left over from my project. So I'm putting this down. It's funny, you might notice that I use liquid glue for the paper. And then for Mickey, I did my adhesive tape runner. Because the people that receive these, for the most part, if I have little images like that on them, they'll pop them off and use them in their own project. So I love the fact that they get reused. So I try to make it a little easier for them. And then I grabbed from my stash some of these old dots, and I'm just kind of sprinkling them on the page. So here you can see that I did that second card. I'm going to do one more set that's at the angle. I just really like how those turned out. So I'm cutting it here, but I'm going to show you how I cut the red. So I went ahead and did my 4 by 5.25, and then just using that one sheet as my guide, I line the red piece up, and then I can match the two left, and they match perfectly. So they'll be companions to each other. So now I don't know yet what I want to do with the rest of my papers, but I kind of cut it into 4 more chunks. I'm not sure if I'll end up cutting these down again, but I find that I like the matting on it. It just kind of gives it more weight, more importance. It shows off the patterns more, I think. So I had a little corner fall off here, and so I will glue that back down. I don't normally have issues with this, but I think my glue was getting too dry. I don't know if it was hot in the room and I had my fan on, and so my glue was drying, but I will have to fix another corner. And then this Mickey here looking up at the happy birthday, I just thought was too cute, but I wanted something else behind it. So I'm going to go ahead and matte my pattern paper that I created, but then also use some of that red in the background to make the illusion of a stripe. Just again, something to kind of anchor the pattern paper that's matted to the card base, because it's now touching both sides. And I'm going to cut that down into just 1-inch pieces. I will use that for the other card as well. I'll make basically 2 of every card with just different Mickey images and maybe a slight variation on how they're set up. But the happy birthday is what I'm using for all of these. You could give 8 happy birthday Mickey cards to somebody, but I don't have anybody in my receiving gifts circle that could use that many. So I'm dividing them up into 2 and 2. So I'll end up with enough Mickey cards to make 4 sets of these little note cards to use as gifts to give away. So I'm matting this happy birthday with one of the strips that was left over. Gives it just kind of a nice little frame. And I won't assemble that second card, but I'm doing kind of the prep work at the same time. I like to work efficiently. That's just who I am. I know some people they're like, oh no, that's too much of the same. I need to have my creative juices. If I do that, it doesn't work for me. That's great. This is what works for me. So find what works for you. So here I'm going to cut some foam tape to pop up that sentiment, and they peel off real easy. And then again, to anchor it to the other side of the card base so that it's not a floating rectangle in the middle, I just put the sentiment there. Now I'm going back and adding some of the highlight lines to Mickey's eyes as well as his ears and shoes. And that's something that you can do or not do. I found I was doing it on my scrapbook pages last month and it really made a difference in the final project. So now I'm just going to add some more bling that I have found in my stash. These are kind of like starbursts or flower bursts. And there, you can't see it on camera, but there's like some yarn that has gotten into these and has stuck to the adhesive. So I really end up struggling with that and end up fighting with yarn because I probably had a little bit of glue on my hands from creating my pattern paper, and it was an interesting time. So I created that other card off camera, and now I'm on to my next set of cards here. And I love this Mickey laying down, but I couldn't find a way that I felt he looked right on this card. It just, where his eyes were going and the happy birthday, it kind of worked, but he just felt too overwhelming, too big. And then the pattern paper was getting lost. And so I didn't want the big Mickey and the pattern paper competing with each other. So I went back to a more simple form here. And now I'm going to, again, anchor that pattern paper to the edge of the card base by having another color touch both the edge of the card base and that center. I hope that makes sense. I tried like 6 times to use that yellow as a mat, and every time it's too much yellow for me. It competes too much with that pattern paper. So I just cut a 5.5 inch piece here, and then I'm cutting it in half because I'll use one for each card. It doesn't matter to me the exact width. I'm just trying to use up scraps at this point. So I will mat both of these pattern papers onto a black frame. And then again, that just gives it a little more oomph. I love how my pinstriping with that shimmer trim kind of is the same width as the mat that I have on that. It's just kind of a continuity thing that helps your eyes and is just a general good rule for composition. You can obviously break rules, but it's just an easy thing to do and make things work out. So now I'm just going to mat this with the black cardstock that was left over from cutting the map. I am just being opportunistic at this time. I'm taking the scraps that are around my desk. I know that I'm going to create some of the note card holders for these cards. So having leftover scraps is fine. I want to make sure that I have some variety of colors for making those folders. But at the same time, I am not going to have to move these scraps one more time, not feel guilty for throwing them out. And so here are the final 8 cards. Again, I had that Mickey head from the Cricut cut, and these other cards just all came together. So this is what I'm showing you for this notebook cover, that you can just send or give 6 to 8 cards in a little notebook. And it's just easy. I don't put a lot on the front of the notebook, but I'm going to tell you here how to cut it out in your dimensions. And I will also have those on a sheet. It might not be right today, but I will have that in the description. But your base is going to be 6 inches tall by 4 1/4 inch wide, and then you score that at 4 3/4 and 5 1/2, and that's just scoring in the center, giving it a 3/4 inch center seam right out of the middle of your paper. And then I'm going to count off here 30 inches of ribbon, and that's going to be my tie. And for me, you can use whatever ribbon you want. I use my adhesive runner at this time because I don't need anything necessarily really strong to hold the ribbon per se. I'm looking more to just keep it on the card front while I finish assembling the rest of it that will sandwich that ribbon in. So making sure to not go too far towards the center. So you want to leave about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch from the score line at the center, and that same distance from the outside edge with your adhesive, so that you're not adhering your ribbon right down to the center or to the edges. And then my front panels are going to be 4 3/8, so just 1/8 under 1/2 of 4 1/2, and then 5 3/4, and you need 2 of those. I went ahead and ran those through an embossing folder just to give it some texture. Like I said earlier, I don't like to decorate the front with anything really bulky because I know people like to kind of have these on a bookshelf or tucked in, and then those kind of things get dinged and bruised and make it bulky and awkward. So I keep my fronts on these pretty smooth. I did sand the front of it off so that you can see more of the embossing folder. And then I'm showing you here, I use quite a bit of glue, of a strong glue, to hold this card base down, because this is also sandwiching in that ribbon and securing it to your covers. I hope that makes sense. So then just give this time to dry and you can set this aside for now. So now what we have left is the band for the envelopes to go under and the pocket for the cards to go in. So the pocket for the cards, you start with a piece that's 10 1/2 by 2 3/4. So I'm going to trim this down to 2 3/4. And I'm looking at my measurements on my desk. That's why it's taking me a minute to line that up. And then moving it over to 10 1/2. So now this is 10 1/2 by 2 3/4. And you are going to score this. I do a 1/2 inch from each end because, again, this is kind of a center situation. You're even side. So a 1/2 from each end. And then from one side, also score at the 5 inch and the 5 1/2 inch. And that's all you need. So if you have a longer scoreboard than I do, that would be 1/2 inch, 5, 5 1/2, and 10. Otherwise, 1/2 inch from each end, and then 5 and 5 1/2. So now if you pay attention here, you're going to cut bigger angles kind of as relief for this pocket. When you fold it up, you're going to need these spaces. And then this one piece here, you make an M. So all of your cuts are on the inside of those score lines. And then again here, you're just cutting out little wedges to give it some ease when you fold it up. So the first thing that I do is I don't fold this hard. You'll notice that I don't go ahead and press all of those folds in until I get this flap glued, because what I like to do is I will glue this flap. And again, it was a struggle bus day, I guess, because I glued it together and then I went to squeeze it and there was too much glue, and then I went to fold it the other way to kind of get my hinges better, or not hinges, but my folds a little looser, and then the glue came undone. But now once I have it glued, I'll go ahead and varnish those folds in and kind of fold it back and forth just to give some edges. And I want you to pay attention to the flap that has its kind of rough edge or raw edge is facing towards me. And that's the first edge or first bottom flap that you want to fold down, because that way you'll end up with both raw edges from the bottom and from that side on one side of your pocket. And you can then put those all towards the back of your covers and nobody will see those raw edges. And here I'm just kind of gluing it down. I think it, earlier I had my glue drying too fast. Now my glue is drying too slow. We've had rain here, so I'm wondering if it was just a humid day. So I'm just going to drop one of the acrylic blocks inside there to hold it down while it dries. And then in the meantime, I'm going to gather some of my pattern papers, my leftovers, and gather my cards. So I grabbed 2 more envelopes than the number of cards I'm going to put in it. So here's a stack of 8 envelopes, and I'm going to include 6 cards. So then I can wrap this strip around my envelopes, and I'll use tape to kind of bridge that gap. But by having those 2 extra envelopes in there, when I remove them, the other envelopes slide in and out pretty easily. And you still don't want to pull super tight, but by having those 2 extra envelopes, it just makes it easier to fold, and I don't have to think about it too much. So I'm going to take my envelopes and put them, I have some that need to go with those cards because I've stamped them, and others that are just blank and extra. So now I have those to the side, and we're just going to attach this band to the inside of our cover. You can do whichever side you like. I like to have the cards on the right and my envelopes on the left. And then I normally sneak in 6 stamps. Like if they're birthday or thank you stamps, I'll slip those right in underneath the band with the envelopes so that they not only get the 6 note cards, but they also get the stamps to mail them. So it's kind of a nice little gift, I think, thoughtful. So far, nobody has, been like, ew, what's this? They have been very grateful in receiving them. So now you'll see that those 6 envelopes fit in there nicely, and there's still a gap. Our pocket is ready to go, but I'm going to decorate it before I attach it. So again, just playing here with what scraps are left, and there's really not that many. I think when I make my next 2, or actually next 3 covers, I'm going to have to get out some more cardstock, especially for those envelope bands. And so I'm just auditioning some of my daisies. Normally I would shape these, but again, I like to keep these a little flatter so that it will close well. I think in hindsight, I should have embellished this or decorated it before I glued the bottom together, but then I would have had to wait for the bottom flap to dry. So it's 6 of one, half dozen of other. You just have to decide what works for you. Do keep in mind, if you're watching this and I'm going too fast or going too slow, that you can change the playback speed in YouTube, and you can slow it down, you can jump back to repeat sections. All of that is there for you to control. So here, like I said, normally I would shape these daisies, and it's okay. I keep telling myself, it's okay, you want it flat. You want it flat, it's okay. In hindsight, again, I could have gotten my shimmer brush out and added some shimmer to my daisy to give it some more pizzazz. That wouldn't have changed its flatness level. So again, here I recommend using a good amount of glue, especially around the edges and the bottom edge of these pockets. And it's towards the bottom, but it's not quite at the bottom. You want to give yourself kind of an edge along the center and the outside and bottom edges. So now you just put your cards in your pocket, you have your envelopes in, you can tie the front, and you're good to go. Here's how you can connect with me. If there's any of the products you're interested in, they're in the description link below the video, as well as ways to connect with me. Some links are from Amazon, and if you order that way, it helps me out. Here's another video you may be interested in. I hope you have a great day. Blessings.